It's Tuesday, February 11th, 2025. Deputizing IRS agents and shipping them to the border. Trump had a very interesting comment about his vice president, and I noticed something happened over the weekend that followed a suspicious pattern. We need to talk about it next on the AM Update.
I think we're going to move them to the border. Well, they're allowed to carry guns. You know, they're so strong on guns.
If anyone leaks anything, people don't understand that jeopardizes the lives of our great men and women in law enforcement.
Do you view Vice President J.D. Vance as your successor, the Republican nominee in 2028?
No, but he's very capable.
And Donald Trump, he doesn't move at the speed of prior administrations. He moves lightning quick.
You are a child of God. That's what I want to say to you, that you are special. Do you know that about yourself, that you are special?
The Trump administration is seeking to deputize IRS agents to carry out illegal immigration enforcement with Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the U.S. Interior. In a letter to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem wrote that IRS agents are needed to assist with apprehension and removal of illegal aliens. A senior Department of Homeland Security official told Fox News they expect the request to be granted. In January, Donald Trump, speaking to a crowd, previewed what we're seeing now.
Day one, I immediately halted the hiring of any new IRS agents. You know, they hired or tried to hire 88,000 new workers to go after you, and we're in the process of developing a plan to either terminate all of them or maybe we'll move them to the border. I think we're going to move them to the border.
Yeah, that seems like a better use of IRS agents rather than tracking down every single dollar, which they already know you owe, but they won't tell you how much you actually owe. That seems like a better use of the IRS, actually cleaning up this country of illegal aliens. Well, told you yesterday about those ICE raids that have been foiled by leakers. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem laid the blame at the feet of the FBI. Here's Attorney General Pam Bondi.
If anyone leaks anything, people don't understand that jeopardizes the lives of our great men and women in law enforcement. And if you leaked it, we will find out who you are and we will come after you. And it's not going to stop our mission. It's not going to stop the president's mission to make America safe again. We were very clear with the lawsuit that we filed in Chicago that if you don't follow the law, you will be prosecuted by the Department of Justice.
In other news, President Trump says he's dismissing members of the Board of Visitors for each of the U.S. military service academies. Trump made the announcement on social media saying the dismissals would impact the boards of visitors for the U.S. Army Academy or West Point, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, and the Coast Guard Academy. Each academy's Board of Visitors is tasked with influencing and maintaining the curriculum and culture at the schools. The boards consist of appointees from various sources, with 6 members being chosen by the president, 4 from the Speaker of the House, 3 from the Vice President, and 1 each from the House and Senate Armed Services Committee. The White House did not immediately clarify whether Trump's Monday order dismisses all members of the boards or only those who are presidential appointees. Donald Trump, during his pre-Super Bowl interview with Fox News' Bret Baier, was asked a pretty pointed question and had an interesting answer.
Do you view Vice President J.D. Vance as your successor, the Republican nominee in 2028?
No, but he's very capable. I mean, I don't think that I think you have a lot of very capable people. So far, I think he's doing a fantastic job. It's too early. We're just starting.
But by the time you get to the midterms, he's going to be looking for an endorsement.
Yeah, a lot of people have said that this has been the greatest opening, almost 3 weeks, in the history of the presidency.
It's definitely been the fastest and the most stuff happening.
We've done so much so fast, and we really had to, because they have really, what they've done to our country is so sad. It's so sad. We're going to be bigger, better, and stronger than ever before.
So that is interesting. Here's my take on this. And this is descriptive, not prescriptive. This is not necessarily what I hope happens. I don't think it's the worst case scenario, but this is just descriptive. I think it is a fool's errand for anyone, to try to run in the 2028 GOP primary that is not named J.D. Vance. I think that's a fool's errand, so long as it is apparent that there's no major rift developed between the Vances and the Trumps. Otherwise, it is J.D. Vance's nomination to lose. Having said all of that, It doesn't matter who the GOP nominee is in 2028 if the next 4 years are not a rousing success. So far, it looks like we're headed that direction, but we have to concentrate on the here and now before we start talking about the future too much. You may be wondering, what are the statuses of various Trump picks making their way through this Senate confirmation process? I'm wondering the same thing myself. Seems like things are being held up quite a bit. Senator Rick Scott wrote on X yesterday, Senate Democrats are obstructing every step of the confirmation process for President Trump's team. We've confirmed 13 of Trump's nominees, most of whom were impacted by Democrats delaying votes. By this time in the Obama administration, twice as many of his nominations were confirmed. It's a total double standard from the Democrats, but we won't give up. We will confirm Trump's entire team. Scott went on to say later on in the day, today we're moving forward to vote on Tulsi Gabbard's nomination, and we're one step closer to getting her confirmed. Democrats are forcing us to jump through hoops to confirm Trump's team, despite the fact that Obama had twice as many nominations confirmed. So, again, Republicans are laying the blame at the feet of the Democrats, trying to obfuscate, delay, hold up every single one of Donald Trump's cabinet appointments. We are getting into the middle of February now, and we only have 13 of his picks confirmed thus far. That is absolutely ridiculous. I wasn't born yesterday. Are we really sure that this Republican Senate is doing everything they can to make sure the Democrats don't even have an opportunity to play stick in the mud here? Are we sure about that? Is John Thune, is the Rick Scott, is that cabal doing everything they can do? I think it's a pretty safe assumption that answer is probably no. So I missed this. I told you about the CBS News YouGov poll that came out over the weekend, showing some really strong numbers and strong sentiments in favor of the new Donald Trump administration. But I missed this. Check out this. This is Donald Trump's approval rating by age range, and this is really surprising to me. Amongst the boomer generation, Donald Trump's approval rating, you probably think it's 70, 30, something. No. It's 50-50 amongst baby boomers. Amongst Gen Xers, Trump enjoys a plus 12 approval rating, 56-44. Amongst millennials, probably really unpopular, right? Nope, Donald Trump enjoys a 52-48 approval rating. And amongst Zoomers, the youngest generation now politically aware, Donald Trump has a plus 10 margin in approval rating amongst Zoomers. I don't want to toot my own horn. I don't think I've said this publicly very often. When I was in high school and I was starting to get interested in politics, becoming politically conscious for the first time, I had a very low view of my generation. And I do think in a lot of ways the millennial generation is a truly lost generation. I mean, the foible, the laziness, just the lack of get up and go, the lack of ambition. I see that everywhere to this day with my generation, by and large. I was very low on my generation when I was even in high school. I didn't think very much of millennials. But I did, for whatever reason, my instinct told me that the generation following millennials would be very conservative. And I don't know what informed that at the time. And again, high school for me was 15 years ago or so. But that seems to be playing out in real time. Donald Trump, his second most popular support group in terms of age range, are Zoomers, right behind Gen Xers. That is pretty nuts. When we come back, there's already some fruit from Donald Trump's executive order banning dudes who feel pretty from competing in female athletics. Russell Brand tries to preach the gospel to a porn star, and we get an update on Western North Carolina from the new Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy. That's coming up next.
You can't be demanding. You can't be relentless. You can't put yourself first. So, put yourself first. You can't be confident. So be confident. You can't challenge. So challenge. You can't dominate. So dominate.
That is Nike's Super Bowl commercial featuring female athletes and only biologically female athletes. I'm sorry that I have to put the biologically there. It's very interesting that a company like Nike, who has been pimping men competing in women's sports in the past and genderqueer madness for the past several years thought that they needed a commercial that highlighted female athletes and only female athletes. Interesting indeed that they thought they needed to spend their big bucks on a Super Bowl advertisement on that message. This comes after Donald Trump's executive order last week protecting women in girls' sports from dudes who feel pretty who want to play against them. Dr. Jack Turbin, the director of the Gender Psychiatry Program at the University of California, San Francisco, who specializes in the quote-unquote mental health of transgender youth, resigned from an NCAA committee late last week after the organization complied with President Donald Trump's order. In response to that executive order, the NCAA changed its trans inclusion policy to ban so-called trans athletes, see that as men who feel pretty, from women's sports altogether. Turbin, the psychiatrist, wrote a letter to the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, announcing his resignation from the NCAA Committee on Competitive Safeguards and Medical Aspects of Sports. He said, quote, "Unfortunately, your recent decision to issue a blanket ban on trans female participation in women's sports does not align with medical or scientific consensus. I cannot in good conscience participate in this kind of politicization of science and medicine at the expense of some of our most vulnerable student athletes." So, we are already bearing fruit from that executive order. Not only did the NCAA and their quisling president tuck tail and acquiesce to Trump's executive orders, now they're losing woke, ridiculous, probably mentally ill psychiatrists from some of their governing boards as well. The NCAA is. So good news continues to abound. New Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy is on the ground in western North Carolina surveying the ongoing damage and trying to figure out rebuilding plans. He talked to Fox News about the extent of the devastation, including a major interstate highway.
So you see I-40 here behind me. This is the eastbound lane. It is completely washed away for much of the section between North Carolina and Tennessee. And so our role as the Department of Transportation is to provide money and expertise to the two departments in, again, North Carolina and Tennessee to rebuild this important stretch, this important artery that connects people and commerce, not just between the states, but across the country. And so we're out here looking at the damage and assessing how much money it's going to cost to do this rebuild. And by the way, it is going to be billions of dollars to rebuild just this stretch of the highway. Also, it's going to, as you see, it's been washed out through here. It's going to take rock to fill this back in and build the roadway back up. Well, we can get rock 30, 40 miles away. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money, but the Forest Service can partner with us, and we think they're really close. Just about a mile and a half over this mountain, we can get access to rock that'll drive down the cost and the time frame for which it'll take to rebuild this road. So, again, we're out here assessing and looking at how we can partner with local officials to rebuild quickly. And Donald Trump, he doesn't move at the speed of prior administrations. He moves lightning quick. So we want to go fast, we want to go cheap, and we want to go safe.
This is Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy on the damage still they're trying to rebuild and just figure out how you rebuild to the extent that you need to, because this is a massive, it's almost incomprehensible how much damage was done from Hurricane Helene all the way up in Appalachia. And Interstate 40, major artery through that neck of the woods, and still sections of it completely knocked out. Check out this story from Axios. Iran's threat to assassinate Donald Trump during the 2024 campaign was far more serious than publicly known and led to extraordinary precautions by his team that included using a decoy plane to avert feared attempts on his life. Alex Eisenstadt's upcoming book, Revenge: The Inside Story of Trump's Return to Power, reveals the depth of U.S. authorities' concerns about an Iranian attack on Trump and how it impacted him. Law enforcement officials warned Trump last year that Tehran had placed operatives in the U.S. with access to surface-to-air missiles. Trump's team worried that the Iranians could try to down his easily recognizable personal jet, better known as Trump Force One, as it was taking off or landing. The concern intensified after a foiled assassination attempt of Trump at his golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida, on September 15th. Iran hasn't been officially linked to that incident or the shooting in Pennsylvania 2 months earlier, which that bullet nicked Trump's ear. But at one point, soon after the Florida incident, Trump's security detail was concerned enough about the Iran threat that it had Trump travel to an event on a decoy plane owned by Steve Witkoff. He's a Trump friend and real estate executive who's now Trump's envoy to the Middle East. Much of Trump's staff traveled on Trump Force One that day, infuriating some aides who'd worried they'd be collateral damage if the jet were shot down. The Secret Service also organized a decoy motorcade that day for Trump's return trip to Butler, Pennsylvania, with Trump in one and staffers in another motorcade. There were also other scares for Trump's campaign. The Secret Service warned campaign leaders after a September 18th rally in Long Island, New York. They had intelligence that someone might be looking to shoot up his motorcade. During a trip to Pennsylvania the next week, Secret Service agents noticed a drone following Trump's motorcade. Officers in one of the cars opened up the moonroof and shot down the drone with an electromagnetic gun, disabling it. Some pretty wild details here about the extent of fears over Iranian influence and attempts on Donald Trump's life, detailed in Alex Eisenstadt's new book, Revenge, the Inside Story of Trump's Return to Power. I'd seen a few things rumbling around at the time that Iran had probably better capabilities than maybe we gave them credit for when it comes to their operatives inside the United States, but some of these details are still shocking nonetheless. Russell Brand, still on his faith journey, decided to have a porn star on his podcast the other day, but for a very good reason, as I think will become obvious to you in just a few moments. The porn star, you probably heard of her before. I'm not going to say her name. I don't want to give her any more attention than she's already tried to get herself. But this is the woman, the young lady on the porn platform OnlyFans, which should be banned like yesterday. She set a Guinness World Record for the number of men slept with in a single day. Probably saw headlines about this a few weeks ago. And it's just sad. It's just sad. It's awful. It's evil. It's wicked. All of these men lining up just to use her. That's just wicked and evil. But it's sad that she doesn't have, obviously, anyone in her life who has told her that she's better than this. She was meant for more than this. That she has value and worth. She seemingly had nobody in her life to tell her this until the other day when Russell Brand had her on his podcast.
You are a child of God. That's what I want to say to you, that you are special and that you are sacred and you deserve to be cherished and treasured in every aspect of your life. Do you know that about yourself, that you are special?
I guess I don't think of myself as special, just another girl. I'm not religious or anything like that, so I don't really read into it.
One day you will read into it, Lily. I want you to know that there is a path for you and that you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. And I know you aren't doing anything you don't want to do. But if ever you find yourself in that position, then know that there is a path and a light for you.
That's very kind. Thank you.
That is Russell Brand interviewing the porn star who went viral not that long ago for setting a record, allegedly, of number of men slept with in a single day. She sees herself as worse than trash. That's heartbreaking. The demons that have sold her these lies. It's tragic. And good for Russell Brand. Good for him. You know, I criticized him one of the first episodes back in the new year. Not really him, but really the phenomenon around new celebrity believers. But here he is just overtly using his platform, using his new knowledge of faith to speak truth to a young woman who so desperately and obviously needs it. So good for Russell Brand. And now here's this. Mark Krikorian has been one of the leading immigration restrictionists in America for decades. He was interviewed by Nate Hochman at America 2100 recently about why and how the shift has happened on the American right on the issue of immigration. Listen to this. It's kind of long, but it's really good.
For those of us who are Zoomers, who came of political consciousness in the Trump era, there was always at least a faction of the GOP that was serious about immigration hawkishness. And for folks who have sort of been in this space for much longer and lived through the Bush amnesty, that's a much more radical kind of alteration of the political world.
True.
And I was talking to some other folks who have been in the immigration space for a while, and they were saying, you know, seeing the RNC and a sea of signs that said mass deportations now was like an out-of-body experience for people who lived through the Bush era. How has the GOP's attitude about immigration changed?
The GOP has gotten a lot more hawkish on immigration. There's no question about it. And in both illegal and legal immigration. Now, it's not like those kind of high walls but open wide gates people have disappeared. It's still there. And, you can't expect to, there's no such thing as total political victory. But they're at the back of the bus now. Clearly, because of Trump personally, but because of what Trump has done by essentially enabling the public concern among voters to actually be manifested in their Republican leadership. Yeah. And I say, and it's not just illegal immigration. That almost has become, at this point, litmus test. I mean, it's only a handful of Republicans, and they're not even really Republicans anymore, who take that kind of lackadaisical view with regard to illegal immigration. I mean, it was especially libertarians. And actually, the interesting thing is the immigration issue is, I think, one of the things that's reshuffling where the libertarians fit. Totally. Which in the country as a whole, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, there are no actual libertarians in flyover country are just conservatives who don't go to church. Right. But in D.C., it matters. The Cato Institute and what have you. And they were always, or traditionally, an eccentric part of the right, because the issues that were salient were taxes and spending and size of government, and so they agreed with the right. So they were, again, eccentric because they were for abortion and prostitution and drugs and all that stuff. But those just weren't that important. Taxing, spending, government spending was essential. And so they were an eccentric part of the right. Since the Cold War, what John O'Sullivan calls the national question, which is borders, immigration, sovereignty, that whole collection of issues where immigration is probably the one that's at the forefront that you have to deal with, are now more salient. And they're on the left on that issue, basically. And so the immigration is actually turning libertarians into an eccentric part of the left coalition. They're still eccentric because they still want low taxes and all that. I mean, in other words, but what's important to them is open borders, and so they're becoming part of the left. Anyway, to finish the thing about how Republicans have changed, Republican voters even are now much more likely to say they want reductions even in legal immigration. Rasmussen did a poll that where they told people they actually told people the level of legal immigration. They didn't say more or less, because what does that mean? They told them, well, here's the number, what do you think it should be? And a majority of the respondents, Republicans, wanted it to be cut by half or more. In fact, about 1 out of 5 wanted it to be 0, which, it's not 0. That's just their way of saying, this is a strong opinion of mine. So that's different. Because before, there really was, even among regular voters, a kind of, cognitive imbalance where it's like, well, I don't like too much immigration either, but I love grandma from Minsk, and so I don't know what to say. And, they've gotten over that. And I think Trump helped there, but Trump is also is a cause, but is also an effect of that change.
That is Mark Krikorian, interviewed by America 2100's Nate Hochman. You should give both Nate and America 2100 a follow on social media. Describing the shift in attitude, not just from the wonks in right-wing America, but also down at the granular level in thinking when it comes to immigration. What I want to know, let me know at Real AM Update, either on Instagram or on X. Do you see this in your own circle of friends, family, what have you? Have they gotten more hawkish on the issue of immigration over the past 8 to 10 years? Let me know at Real AM Update on X or Instagram. When we come back, air analysis, a familiar pattern repeated over the weekend. It's kind of a disturbing trend, and I think we need to spend a few minutes talking about it. Sony's PlayStation Network experienced a significant outage on Friday and Saturday, impacting hundreds of thousands of gamers across the world and frustrating users reliant on its online system. PlayStation confirmed the outage in a post on X on Friday evening. As of Saturday afternoon, there were still users reporting to the tune of hundreds of thousands network outages. Now, this is a familiar pattern that has been repeated, and this PlayStation hack or outage, whatever it was, is just the latest in a disturbing trend. I don't really care that gamers weren't able to play multiplayer games online with each other. No, it's just the pattern that I'm concerned about. Here's the pattern. Major tech and telecommunication companies suffer mysterious, widespread, and long-standing quote-unquote outages, and their communication is basically nil. They will acknowledge to some level, to some degree, an outage, and then there's no communication until they have another tepid post on social media, hey, it's back. Last February, the AT&T outage. Last September, the Verizon outage. This February, the PlayStation Network and Sony outage. All following the same disturbing trend. Very familiar. Widespread, long, and no communication as to what is happening. Each example follows the same pattern. No useful communication from the affected companies to their consumers. In the case of last February, we did get a report on what allegedly happened from the FCC when it comes to AT&T, but it wasn't until 5 months later in July they issued a report blaming a hardware and software configuration error. That is very convenient. That's just the latest example, like the numerous near misses of this year of airplanes crashing into each other. News just last night, another example. In Scottsdale, Arizona, 2 jets collided with one another. This time there were deaths and injuries. Is this just cascading coincidences? Is this just, our culture, our country is still kind of on the brink. Things like this just happen. Or is something more malicious afoot? Oh, remember, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of this. The Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. We have no official explanation for how that even happened. Here's what I want to ask. I'm just going to leave it here. Just going to leave it hanging out in the air like a pall. How much has China actually hacked? That'll do it for Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow. Don't forget to look for the poll of the week posted on X at Real AM Update. Look for the pinned posts. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntire, and this is the AM Update. Hey, brief postscript here. Here's what happened on Super Bowl Sunday evening. I'd already stopped watching the game. I had it up on the television as I was preparing for this podcast, waiting for the game to conclude. I was working on some other matters, some other pressing things. I looked up at the TV screen. I saw that there was confetti, and so I knew that the game was over, but the score bug on Fox had already disappeared. So instead of waiting for that to come back up, I actually Googled Super Bowl score. And the score that popped up with zeros on the clock on the score bug on Google was 40-14. 40-14. I didn't know that the final score was 40-22 until I woke up on Monday morning. And a bunch of people said, hey, we know when you stopped watching the game. So that's what happened there. Don't blame me. Blame Google. Thanks for listening.